house. A house nestled in the old alleys of the city, always smelling of fresh bread and damask roses. But this time, something was different. The air was heavy and dusty, and a mysterious silence ruled the alleys. On the first day, everything seemed normal. Farhood helped his grandmother water the garden, clean the house, and listen to her old stories. But at night, when the moon hid behind the clouds, and the house was only lit by the dim light of old lamps, Farhood saw something that made his heart tremble. In a corner of the living room, where the light barely reached, there was a dark and indistinct shadow. It seemed to breathe, growing larger and smaller with each breath. Farhood, wanting to scream, couldn't. Fear had taken root in him. He quietly and with trembling feet moved towards his grandmother's room, taking care to make no sound with each step. "Grandmother, grandmother," Farhood whispered, his voice trembling with fear. "There's something in the living room, something terrifying." The grandmother, with eyes that had seen years and hands that had worked for years, slowly got up. "Farhood, my child, this old house has many stories within its walls. Some of these stories may never end." Farhood, with a heart pounding in his chest, looked at his grandmother. "Grandmother, what is that thing?" His voice was shaking, but his grandmother's gaze was calm and steady. "This house, Farhood, is filled with spirits that cannot find release. Perhaps what you saw is one of them," the grandmother said, with a voice laden with the weight of years of experience and wisdom. Farhood, now driven more by curiosity than fear, returned to the living room. The dark entity was still there, but this time he saw glowing red eyes staring at him from the darkness. Its breaths were heavy and slow, each one accompanied by an eerie, unsettling rhythm. Farhood cautiously stepped forward. Who are you?" he asked. The sound that came from the entity was like the wind at night, cold and lifeless. "Farhood, Farhood." A deep dread penetrated Farhood's being. This entity knew his name, but how? Farhood looked back, hoping his grandmother was still there, but he was alone. His grandmother had disappeared. "Grandmother, where is grandmother?" Farhood asked louder, but the only answer he received was the echo of his own voice against the old house's walls. The dark entity slowly moved towards him, and with each step, it seemed to shake the ground. Farhood, now unable to move, waited to see what fate awaited him. The dark entity, with its glowing red eyes, slowly approached him. Each step it took seemed to shake the ground, and a sound like the whispering of the wind at night could be heard. "Farhood, Farhood." The voice of the entity was now clearer and more terrifying. You can see me, you can hear me." Farhood, tears of fear streaming from his eyes, looked for a way to escape, but his legs would not obey him. What do you want from me?" he asked with a trembling voice. The dark entity, now standing right in front of him, said, I am the memories of this house, memories that have been forgotten, memories that are in pain. And you, Farhood, you must hear them." Farhood, now understanding that this entity was a spirit from the house's distant past, thought of the pasts his grandmother had never spoken of. How can I help you?" he asked, hope flickering in his voice. "Listen, just listen." The dark entity began to recount a tale of anger, love, betrayal, and revenge. A story that with each word pulled Farhood deeper into the house's dark embrace. And as the dark entity continued its tale, Farhood realized that his grandmother, who had now disappeared, was part of this story. A story that was yet to end. Farhood, now listening to the stories of the dark entity, realized that each memory was a piece of a larger puzzle that his grandmother had always tried to hide. Stories from the distant past, from times when the house was still young and full of life. How can I help you? Farhood asked, his voice now changing from fear to hope. Release me, the dark entity said with a voice that had now become calm and gentle. Release me so I can find peace. Farhood, now understanding that this entity was a spirit seeking solace, extended his hands towards it and felt a warmth spreading from his hands into his entire being. The dark entity, now a vague shape, began to dissolve into the air, and with each particle that disappeared, a brighter light appeared in the house. And at that moment, the grandmother entered with a kind smile. You've done a great thing, Farhood. You freed the spirits of this house. Farhood, now feeling a sense of lightness, looked at his grandmother and said, I just wanted to help. The house, now full of light and peace, became once again a place that Farhood loved, and he knew that from now on, he would never be alone.